Caroline Fenton, and we will be here every Saturday morning during the college football season starting at 10 a.m. Bring you everything you need to know for the day of SEC football ahead of us. I'll have some betting picks for you. I'll have the locks of the day. So if you're looking to make a little bit of money off of these SEC games, the SEC slate of the day, this is exactly where you need to be. Like I said, we are live at 312 Pizza Company in Germantown. So if you need a place to watch the games today, this is the place to do it. As you can see behind me, they have really cool sports memorabilia. They have great pizza, and pizza's not really your thing. They have plenty of other things on the menu. So make sure to come by 312 Pizza Company when they open up at 11 a.m. so you can be here for the first kickoff of the day. So let's get into it. First and foremost, we can break down kind of some things that we learned last week. And I think the dangerous thing that we're dealing with is overreactions from week one. Exactly what was just kind of a fluke and what can we expect for this season coming toward us. So I think week two, the slates of the games are not necessarily matchups that are going to reveal any big time strengths or weaknesses in these teams. But I think in week one, we learned a few things, and I don't want to overreact. But first and foremost, the University of Georgia. Now we heard, was Georgia Clemson the game that could possibly define the college football playoff? And that sounds a little bit ridiculous in week one. And this may be a complete overreaction. And I understand that anything can happen throughout the season. Crazier things have happened. Georgia's in the most difficult conference in college football. There could be a crazy upset that knocks Georgia out of consideration. But I'm going to say it right now. It could be a week one overreaction. But I think that week one solidified Georgia's spot in the college football playoff. Beating Clemson, not even letting them get a touchdown on the board. I mean, a 10-3 game that almost felt like kind of like vintage college football, like a defensive juggernaut. Now, JT Daniels obviously showed some of his weaknesses against Clemson, and we'll get into that further. But I do think my week one overreaction, Georgia will be one of the top four teams going into the college football playoff, which my Georgia pick may surprise you that I said that. So we'll get into all of our picks later on in the show, and I'll get to my Georgia pick later on. They take on UAB today. But another thing that we learned is that Alabama is Alabama, and they're going to do Alabama things because they had everything stacked against them. They lost their starting quarterback, Heisman Trophy finalist. They lost their Heisman Trophy winning wide receiver, their first round wide receiver, and their first round running back, as well as Alex Leatherwood, their offensive lineman, who also went in the first round. They had 7 starters from that national championship team in 2020 go in the first round of the NFL draft. So if you're looking at any other team, it's like, hey, they lost all of these guys. They're going to have a quote unquote rebuilding year. But Nick Saban said, absolutely not. We don't rebuild at Alabama. We just reload. That's exactly what we saw from Alabama last week. And I think you will continue to see that throughout the year. Another takeaway that I had was that Kentucky's preseason hype was absolutely worth it. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that Kentucky can compete with Alabama for the SEC title. Maybe we could see a little bit more from Kentucky, and I'm willing to change my mind after I see Will Levis and that new offense over at Kentucky start to develop and start to do more things against some more difficult opponents. But Kentucky put up 554 total yards on offense. Will Levis, their new starting quarterback, came in, went 18 of 26 with 367 yards and 4 touchdowns. Now, his first pass was an interception. And I thought, okay, this maybe just needs some time to settle in. And I think that was exactly it. He threw the interception and said, nope, I'm done with that. We are going to absolutely go off the rest of this game. Threw for 4 touchdown passes. His 367 passing yards were the most by a Kentucky quarterback since the 2014 season opener, when their quarterback, Patrick Trolls, threw for 377 yards. So Kentucky fans, if you're looking for one of the best teams that you've had in a while, I think Will Levis, your new quarterback, is going to do exactly that. My last takeaway from last week, which is kind of going to guide some of my picks for this week, is that LSU is still in a national championship hangover. And you may have heard my pick last week and said, Caroline, you were just a homer picking LSU on the money line. Yeah, you know what? I was. But I think coming into this game, I didn't expect LSU to get completely beat up in the trenches by UCLA. They looked confused. They looked poorly coached, if we're being totally honest. And I'll have my LSU pick later in the show when they take on McNeese State today. But LSU is still in a national championship hangover. But with that, I will get to some of my picks of the week. Our early game, our 11 o'clock game today, Tennessee Pitt in the Johnny Majors Cup, if you want to call it that. So Pitt travels to Neyland Stadium today to kick off at 11 o'clock Central Time. I'm going to take the line has shifted on this game severely. First, it was Tennessee minus 3.5, and then it shrunk to Tennessee -1, switched over to Pitt -1, -3, -3.5, all in a matter of days. This Tennessee Pitt line has completely shifted, but I'm going to take Pitt -3.5. And I think that a Pat Narduzzi-led Pitt and a Pat Narduzzi-led defense is going to do Tennessee in. And I think that Pat Narduzzi wants nothing more than to walk into Neyland Stadium and get a win, an SEC win on the road. And I think Pat Narduzzi's defense is going to do everything in their power to shut down this quote-unquote high-powered, up-tempo Josh Heupel offense. And we saw a glimpse of it in Tennessee's game against Bowling Green. And I think we're going to see a little bit more of it whenever this offense gets a little bit more comfortable with one another, whenever Joe Milton starts to settle into this offense a little bit more. He starts to build a little bit more trust with his receivers, because we saw him miss some wide open throws. We saw him not even attempt to throw to some wide open receivers. So I think that once you see this offense settle in a little bit, you might see Tennessee come in with a little bit more confidence, but I don't think that they're quite there yet. I'm going to take Pitt -3.5. But if Tennessee does win this game, the key for Tennessee is going to be running the ball. I mean, they ran 330 yards on the ground against Bowling Green last week. Tennessee lost two of their biggest running threats, so that's not what I expected. What did we hear about Josh Heupel? This passing offense, this high-powered, quick offense, long, deep ball throws. But also, you have to keep in mind that UCF, in his 3 years tenure at UCF, they averaged 44 rush attempts with Josh Heupel at the helm. So I think Pitt is going to come in, and their plan is going to be is to attack Joe Milton. But if Tennessee doesn't give Joe Milton the opportunity to make those bad throws that would have been intercepted if they were playing Pitt and not Bowling Green, if Tennessee decides to run the ball, I think that could possibly be Tennessee's key to victory. With what I know from a Pat Narduzzi defense, and even a Pitt defense that lost 5 starters, including Rashad Weaver, which will be familiar to some Titans fans here in Nashville, I still think that Pitt gets it done. We've also got South Carolina, East Carolina. Now, this line was a little confusing to me. It's USC -2.5, U of SC for all of you Southern Cal people out there, -2.5. I think that's easy money, because South Carolina sucks, but in SEC standards, South Carolina is not great. East Carolina also isn't great in terms of AAC standards, I think that Shane Beamer knows the task that he has at hand. I don't think South Carolina fans are expecting a run for the East. I don't think South Carolina fans are expecting wins against Georgia and Florida and this new Kentucky offense. But South Carolina fans expect wins over East Carolina. Shane Beamer knows that now that they have their starting quarterback settling back in and their grad assistant is no longer throwing the football for them. I think South Carolina gets it done. I think South Carolina -2.5 is going to be easy money. Florida, South Florida. Now, South Florida is absolute garbage. I'm going to take Florida -28.5. South Florida got shut out by NC State 45-0, and they were 1-5 in their last 6 games against SEC opponents. Now, Emory Jones didn't look great in their first game against Florida Atlantic. He looked a little bit shaky. Now, that's to be expected. You have to expect a little bit of settling in time for your starting quarterback. He was 7 of 27, 113 yards, touchdown, 2 interceptions. Not great. But you possibly could, similar to Tennessee, see Florida get a majority of their points on the ground. 400 yards rushing against FAU last week. So if Emory Jones starts to get a little bit shaky again, Florida can rely on that running game and get it done on the ground. Florida -28.5. I think that's easy money as well. Texas A&M travels to Denver, takes on Colorado. The line here's A&M -16.5, and that's exactly what I'm going to take. So Also, over under on this game, I don't know how many times the broadcasters are going to mention the altitude in Denver and how that's going to affect Texas A&M. And I think that's going to be like, your week 0. It's always though it's 115 degrees on the field. You've got your sideline reporter with the most massive thermostat you've ever seen in your entire life. That's your week 0 narrative. I think your week 2 narrative, Texas A&M at Colorado, the narrative is going to be altitude. But that's actually a fair point. A&M could have a little bit of trouble adjusting to the air in Denver, especially so early in the season. But I still think that Texas A&M gets it done. Now, Haynes King was one quarterback that I listed on quarterbacks that I need to see a little bit more from, quarterbacks that I wasn't totally impressed with in week 1. He went 21 of 33, threw for 292 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions against Kent State. Now, it's week 1. He's a new starting quarterback. But Kent State, it's not a defense that you're going to be afraid of. And Texas A&M is going to be facing much more difficult defenses than Kent State, especially against Colorado, which they will see today. Great arm. He's great on third down. Converted 9 of 13 third downs. Showed his mobility on third down scrambles. And he's great on third downs in these clutch situations. So I do think that he has a very high upside. There's a lot of room for improvement. And I think time is going to do exactly that. But another key to this game, he has some kinks to work out, which he could possibly do today. But also, Texas A&M can get it done on the ground. Devon Achane. Now, you've heard Isaiah Spiller's name over and over again. ESPN listed him as Texas A&M's most likely Heisman contender. But I think Devon Achane is going to be another person to look for. They have 2 big-time running threats, Texas A&M. So what's the theme here with a lot of these games? New quarterback, settling into a new system, settling into a new team. If they start to get spooked a little bit in week 2, they can get it done on the ground. Give me Texas A&M minus 16.5. Now, this game's kind of sad. Mercer, Alabama. There is no spread listed, and I think that's probably fair because if I'm Vegas, I'm thinking it at probably minus 75.5. However, I don't even think this game is worth putting your money on. I don't know exactly what the money line is. It's probably minus 400,000 if I had to guess. Not even worth your money, but you're going to want to put money on Alabama in the future. So a few things to look out for Alabama and Mercer today. Bryce Young looked outstanding against Miami. He became the first Alabama quarterback to throw for 4 touchdown passes in his first career start. Mac Jones and a guy named Joe Namath, if you've ever heard of him, each threw for 3. So Bryce Young now holds that starting quarterback record. He completed 27 of 38 attempts for 344 yards, spread the ball to 9 different pass catchers. So if that doesn't just show his versatility, it also shows the amount of threats that Alabama has on that offense, that he trusts 9 different guys with the rock. Passed for 158 yards, 3 touchdowns. Bryce Young is absolutely outstanding. But one thing that you're going to want to watch for today is he going to have any sort of setbacks? Because it seems, against Miami, if he has a big statement win, if he has a big statement game, that's who he is. But he's a new quarterback, and I know this isn't his first start ever. But Miami has a pretty terrible defense, and I can only expect that Mercer's is probably worse. But look out for Bryce Young. Look to see if there are any holes in his game. Look to see if he does have any weak spots in his game. And I think that's going to be important moving forward when you do choose to put money on Alabama, when it's a little bit more worth your while. Also, check for Alabama to stay injury-free. That's going to be key for Alabama today. And I know that Nick Saban approaches every single opponent like it's the national championship. He's not going to hold his players back just because it's Mercer. But Christopher Allen, their outside linebacker, he is out for the rest of the season after his foot against Miami. Henry To'o also had a little bit of an injury scare against Miami. Now he'll be starting against Mercer today. However, it's key for Alabama to stay injury-free on defense, especially after losing so many assets last year. This game was kind of an interesting one, and it feels like it should have been easier than it was. NC State, Mississippi State was kind of a tough one for me to pick. The line here is just at 1, and I'm going to take NC State minus 1. I think the line there is at minus 105, NC State minus 1. So I think when it comes down to it, NC State is a more consistent team, and Mississippi State has virtually 0 consistency. Now, NC State stomped South Florida 45-0 and picked them off 3 times. While last week, Mississippi State just barely squeaked out a win against Louisiana Tech, beat them by 1 point, and they were trailing at several points in the game. Now, I don't know exactly what Mike Leach's plan is over there in Starkville, but some days Mississippi State will go off for 550 yards passing, and then sometimes they almost lose to Louisiana Tech. The inconsistencies make it incredibly difficult to bet on Mississippi State. But I'm going to take NC State with this one. Also, another key point here. Mississippi State's right guard, Quatravius Johnson, was arrested on Monday. Now, he is cleared to play today. But when it comes to consistency, focus on the important things, I can't imagine that would necessarily help. Not that that's a huge contributing factor to his gameplay on the field, but doesn't. Austin Peay, Ole Miss. What I saw from Ole Miss against Louisville, I knew that Ole Miss's offense was going to be incredibly high-powered. I knew Lane Kiffin was going to sling the ball, but I needed to see improvement on defense. And that's exactly what I saw from Ole Miss. Last year, it seems like Ole Miss could score points like crazy, but they also gave up points like crazy. Look at the Alabama-Ole Miss game last year. I don't know the score off the top of my head, but it felt like it was 150 to 155. It was such a high-scoring game because Ole Miss just gave up points like crazy. Ole Miss's defense last week, against Louisville looked outstanding. I'm going to take Ole Miss minus 34.5. That line is really big, but Ole Miss can get it done. Chase Campbell for Ole Miss on defense. He finally figured out a way to stop the ball. So a first half shutout against Louisville. Third-year quarterback in Malik Cunningham at Louisville. If that doesn't show you exactly how stout this Ole Miss defense can be, and also Matt Corral leading the defense, Snoop Connor running it in twice. They have several threats on offense. I think 34.5 is something that they absolutely can do with Austin Peay. Now, LSU McNeese. And I said LSU is still in a national championship hangover. But against McNeese State, if they can't beat McNeese State by at least 40 points, then I'm concerned. LSU minus 38.5, minus 110. Now, typically, I wouldn't take a spread this large, but LSU coming off of kind of an embarrassing loss, even though the score wasn't terrible, LSU got beat up on both sides of the ball against UCLA. So I think they're going to be looking for a statement win here. And I think that they will not call the dogs off. But one little fun thing to focus on here is that Coach O's son, Cody Orgeron, will be the starting quarterback for McNeese State. So a little father-son matchup going on here. But I'm going to take LSU on the money line, minus 38.5. And I promise you, this isn't a homer pick. I would never do that to y'all. I would never give you picks just being a homer and loving my LSU Tigers. I do think that they get it done here. Now, Max Johnson threw for 330 yards against UCLA. But they ran the ball maybe twice, maybe 3 times. LSU needs to develop that running game, especially with a new quarterback, because Max Johnson looked spooked against UCLA. He looked confused. He was making silly throws. He was missing receivers. He had a few connections to Keyshawn Butte in the end zone, 3 touchdowns from Max Johnson to Keyshawn Butte. But I think that LSU needs to develop their running game a little bit more here. And I think with a weaker opponent in McNeese State, that's when they can start to get things moving a little bit. Now, I have a couple spicy picks of the week. My spicy picks are something that you may hear and you say, what? Like, what are you smoking? What? Absolutely not. But hear me out. I mentioned Georgia earlier in the show. I mentioned that Georgia, I think, has solidified themselves in the college football playoff. Of course, barring any sort of crazy upsets, because it's happened before, it'll happen again. Today, Georgia plays UAB. I'm going to take UAB plus 23.5. And that sounds crazy based off of exactly what I just said about Georgia. However, JT Daniels is questionable for the game today. JT Daniels is dealing with an oblique injury. Now, reports say that he's going to try and work through it. He's tried to convince coaches to let him play the game, to let him start. But he's not going to be 100%. Now, against Clemson, he was 22 of 30 with 135 yards, no touchdowns, and an interception. That's not great. And of course, Clemson's defense is way more intimidating than anything that they will see against UAB. But I think that the spread accounts for that. Also, Carson Beck could possibly fill in JT Daniels' spot. He's a four-star recruit from Jacksonville, Florida, number 234 overall in the ESPN class of 2020. So he could come in, he could go off. But with JT Daniels a little bit questionable, their backup unproven, I feel okay about UAB covering. And UAB, although they're not a stout SEC opponent that Georgia is going to see later in the season, but UAB, had 2 turnovers against Jacksonville State and still shut them out. Their quarterback, Tyler Johnston, 17 of 21, 319 yards, 2 touchdowns. Obviously, Jacksonville State does not have the defense that Georgia has, and Georgia very well could shut out UAB as well. But UAB plus 23.5, just trust me on this one. I feel good about it. Also, another one of my spice picks today, Arkansas, Texas. I'm going to take Arkansas plus 6.5. This is probably the biggest game that Arkansas has played in the last few years. Let's say this is the biggest game Arkansas has played in the past 5 years. This is big. Sam Pittman is going to come out physical. This defense is going to have to get going early. They're going to have to make those stops. They're going to have to pressure the quarterback. Because if you give any sort of leeway to the Steve Sarkisian offenses, they're going to take it. If Texas goes up early, if Texas scores first, if Arkansas can't answer, then go ahead and live bet Texas, because once the Sark offense gets going, it keeps going. And I don't think that this Arkansas team is developed quite well enough to be able to come back from a deficit like that. But I do think Jalen Catalon, defensive back for Arkansas, Grant Morgan, linebacker for Arkansas, 2 of the best defensive players in the SEC this year. So if Arkansas can make those stops, if they can rely on their defense enough, I think they keep it a tight game. So I'm going to take Arkansas plus 6.5. Plus, the Sark era at Texas is very new. I know that he is an offensive wizard, but this era is very, very new. This is only week 2 in a Sark offense versus Sam Pittman, who's been able to develop himself a little bit longer at Arkansas. So give me Arkansas plus 6.5. My lock of the week. Last week, my lock of the week was Georgia on the money line against Clemson. If you didn't listen, you missed out on some free money there. So listen to me this week, because I promise you, Kentucky -5 against Missouri. And this is the only SEC on SEC matchup this year, which makes it a little bit fun. I mentioned it earlier in the show. Kentucky put on a show. Won 45-10 last week. Will Levis at the forefront of that Kentucky offense. They put up 554 yards of total offense. Will Levis leading them to victory with 4 touchdowns. Mizzou barely beat Central Michigan, 34-24. It should have been way more of a beating than that. And I understand, first game of the season, you're working out kinks, you're maybe not totally in tip-top physical shape. But Kentucky was able to get it done against kind of a lower level opponent. Mizzou got the win, of course, but it wasn't as much of a statement win as it should have been. Also, freshman wide receiver Mookie Cooper from Missouri is questionable for the game today. So that's another offensive weapon that Missouri could possibly be losing this week against Kentucky. And Mizzou is 1-5 against the spread in their last 6 games, 1-7 against the spread in their last 8 games on the road. I think that Kentucky fans are incredibly excited about this team here. And exactly like Mark Stoops said, I think that they're going to pack Kroger Field. And I think having home field advantage here is going to be incredibly key for Kentucky. And this spread is not as big as I thought it would be. I honestly would take Kentucky up to -10.5. That's exactly how much I think that Kentucky could dominate Missouri today. Again, this is Southeastern CaroLINES. I am your host, Caroline Fenton. We are live from 312 Pizza Company in Germantown. We'll be live here every Saturday starting at 10 a.m. If you need a place to watch the games today, come out to Germantown. Come to 312 Pizza. They have great pizza. They have classic deep dish Chicago style. They have thin crust pizza. They have Italian beef sandwiches, a Chicago classic. They have all of your favorite bar foods. They've got several local beers on tap. If you need a place to watch the games, if you need a place to just hang out, come down to 312 Pizza Company. Their food is delicious. They're already starting to make the pizzas up, and it smells great. really fun place to hang out. And it's a sports lover's dream, Chicago lover's dream. They have all kinds of Chicago and sports memorabilia hanging up on the walls here. So make sure you come out to 312 Pizza Company and hang out with us as we watch the games today. They're going to do it for us on Southeastern CaroLINES. And as we recap my picks of the day, I'll throw them up on the screen for you here so you can get a better idea of exactly what we're looking at. So I'm going to take Pitt -3.5 as they take on the Tennessee Vols in Neyland Stadium. Florida -28.5 against South Florida. I think that is easy money there. Texas A&M travels to Denver, taking them -16.5. NC State, Mississippi State, if I could just see a little bit more consistency from that offense. Mike Leach, show me exactly what this team is, because at this point, I'm really not exactly quite sure what this Mississippi State team is capable of. Ole Miss -34.5. That spread is massive. But if anyone can do it, the Lane Train can do it, because what we saw against Louisville, Ole Miss looks like they could be a real threat in the SEC this year. LSU -38.5. Also a massive spread. They're taking on McNeese State. Coach O facing his son, Cody Orgeron, the starting quarterback for McNeese State. LSU is looking for a statement win. LSU wants to show people that they don't have a national championship hangover, that they can put up points. And I think that's also what their players need, is just a little bit of a confidence boost there. So I expect big numbers from LSU today. Kentucky -5 against Missouri. This is my lock of the day. Give me Kentucky -5. I said I would take Kentucky up to -10.5. I think Will Levis is settling into this offense very, very well. This is their first SEC game of the year, and SEC East matchup here. And Kentucky knows if they want to take the SEC East in any way, if they want to make a run for the SEC championship, it starts here against Missouri. UAB +23.5 against Georgia. This is one of my spicy picks of the day. And I literally said earlier in the show that Georgia solidified their spot in the college football playoff. But I think UAB covers here. JT Daniels, not 100%, not totally certain if he is starting this week. UAB +23.5. We've also got Arkansas +6.5 against Texas. Now, I don't necessarily know who gets the win here, but I do think that Arkansas is going to keep it tight. And I do think that Sam Pittman going to come out with a stout and powerful Arkansas defense. Again, we're live at 312 Pizza Company in Germantown. We will be back next Saturday, starting at 10 a.m. with all of your SEC picks of the day. And if you want more breakdown of the games, if you want some more college football news, we'll be live on Stillman & Company every weekday from 2 to 6 on ESPN 102.5 The Game. We stream on Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, and the Game Nashville app. That's going to do it for us today. Good luck with all of your picks.